Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. Today we are starting a new series of talks which will go on throughout September, in which we'll get a glimpse of the major works of Sri Aurobindo. Today's talk is about essays on the Gita, which is one of his major works, which emerged from the Arya like many others. And to get a little bit of a glimpse, that's all we can get. I'll once again share the screen with you and show some slides. And before you read on this, that there are 45 slides that you have to tolerate, let me go to full screen. So you'll get a glimpse into Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita. Before I go further, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Essays on the Gita is volume 19 amongst the complete works of Sri Aurobindo, and it is available like the rest of the complete works for free download on the website of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. That is www.sriaurobindoashram.org. As I said, essays on the Gita emerged from the Arya. It has 48 essays divided into two series of 24 essays each. The full name of the Gita, the proper name is Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which means God's song, the celestial song sung by Sri Krishna while giving his teachings to Arjuna. The Gita has 18 chapters and 700 verses. And in Essays on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo says that the Gita has a universal appeal. And that is something which is axiomatic. Anybody can see it because the Gita is amongst the most widely translated books in the world. And people across traditions have turned to it in times of difficulty, sorrow, and the universal appeal is due to many reasons, but Sri Aurobindo has given one very important reason. He says that every scripture has two parts, one which is of everlasting value, that is perennial in nature, and another which is particularly of significance to the time and place at which the scripture was composed and the context in which it was composed. In case of the Gita, the temporal part, that is the context in which it was composed and the time and place where it was composed, is very small. Much of it is of universal and everlasting value. And even that which is temporal can be easily extrapolated to other situations so that it becomes of universal value. Not only that, Sri Aurobindo says that the Gita itself tells us quite often how that message, which is particularly applicable to the context in which it was composed, can be extrapolated. So the Gita itself gives us that as well most of the time. And that is one of the important reasons why the Gita has a universal appeal. There are several other reasons. It is a rather small book, just 700 verses. And, one is intimidated by something big. And this is not a big volume in a tome. It is, in fact, seductively small. People have converted it also into pocket books. It can be pocket book size. Further, it is very student-friendly because all the principles that we use in modern education for making the teaching learning process student friendly have been in fact used by the Gita. And we shall see as we go along how Sri Krishna makes this message particularly friendly to Arjuna And of course, in general, it is a rather student-friendly, seeker-friendly yoga. Further, the context is that of a story, and stories are always more interesting than abstract philosophy. One can understand anything much better through a story than through abstract philosophy. The plot is that of a dilemma. Arjuna has the dilemma whether or not to fight. Arjun is a well accomplished person, very knowledgeable. He knows the customs and mores of the times in which he lives. He knows what his duty is uh, in terms of the situation in which he is placed. And yet he finds that all those tenets, all those codes, all those ethical codes or shastras, the dharma as it is called, sense of right and wrong given in the scriptures, all that which has been very useful to him so far, by which he has lived so far, has proved to be completely useless in this particular situation. And he feels that he still has a dilemma. He cannot decide whether or not to fight. And in fact, he is veering towards not fighting. So, the plot is that of a dilemma. And therefore, any of us who is facing a dilemma of that sort sometimes feels that, well, Arjun had this dilemma and he found a solution in the message of the Gita. Probably I'll find also a solution to my dilemma, my problem, my difficult situation by reading the Gita. And quite often, the person does find that when he reads the Gita, he may not be able to always solve the problem, but at least he gets a lot of solace. And he gets good guidelines about the direction in which he should move to be able to solve the problem. Then the Gita gives an assurance of divine intervention that if you turn to me, then you will receive the help. And that is, these are some of the factors, additional factors why the Gita has a universal appeal, besides the fact that what is of perennial value, universal value, is much greater in the Gita than what is only of merely of temporal significance. Because of its the facility with which it helps a person in difficult times, it has probably prevented more psychological breakdowns than any psychiatrist. About the Gita, Albert Einstein said, when I read the Bhagavad Gita and reflect about how the divine created this universe, everything else seems so superfluous. Now, when it comes to commentaries on the Gita, there's no dearth of commentaries since it's such a widely read book, one of the most widely translated books in the world, and therefore commentaries in different languages from people coming from different traditions abound. But most of the commentaries on the Gita tend to be one-sided. Some of them would say that the Gita says knowledge is more important than action, and some would say just the opposite, that action is more important than knowledge. And some would say with neither action nor knowledge, it is devotion which the Gita has emphasized. And some would say the most important thing the Gita says is renunciation, renunciation of life, or renunciation of what? Uh, some would say it favors renunciation of life, and some would say not renunciation of life, renunciation of the fruit of action, renunciation of attachment to the fruit of action. And the current tendency in the modern day world, which is rather action oriented, is that the main message of the Gita is disinterested performance of duty. Now, all those who make all these comments and sort of have published this sort of one-sided commentaries can easily find support in the Gita, because one can find the appropriate chapter and verse and say that, well, this is what the Gita says, and therefore this is what I'm saying. But the important thing is that the Gita does say all these things, but then the Gita has to be looked at as a whole, not in terms of those parts which tend to confirm our own bias. And that's what Sri Aurobindo has done. Sri Aurobindo has looked at the Gita in one sweep. And further, to facilitate this and to make the essays lucid, what he has done is he has taken the liberty of going back and forth although the sequence of the essays on the Gita is similar to the sequence in the Gita, but if wherever necessary, Sri Aurobindo has gone and back and forth. It is in fact not a chapter and verse translation of the Gita, as many commentaries are, and then follow up each translation with a commentary. These are 48 lucid essays which follow roughly the same sequence as the Gita. They are based on the Gita, but then they are not restricted always to the Gita. And Sri Aurobindo has definitely taken the liberty of going back and forth, if necessary, to give the proper message. And that's what has made this commentary unique among the commentaries on the Gita. It looks at the Gita as a whole in one sweep. Why could Sri Aurobindo do it? He could do it because he did not have to read the Gita like a scripture and then think what it is trying to say, like a philosopher. He had lived the Gita. In fact, he had a darshan. He saw Sri Krishna when he was in jail from 1908 to 1909. During the initial period of his imprisonment, when he was in this dilemma that he was busy with something as important as the freedom struggle, then how is it that the divine has chosen to interrupt his work and brought him to prison? And he asked Sri Krishna, the way Arjun had done, tell me what I have to do. And Sri Krishna, in fact, appeared. Not only he appeared, he stayed with him, had a dialogue with him, told him what the mission in his life was. And Sri Aurobindo saw Krishna not just the way you see it in this picture. He saw Sri Krishna in his bed, in the bars of the prison, in trees, in the jailers, in the prosecution council, in the defense council, and in the judges. He saw Krishna in everyone and everything around him. And he could have a dialogue with him to find out what the mission of his life was. So he had lived the Gita, and therefore he could easily look at the Gita in one sweep and tell us what exactly the Gita as a whole is trying to tell us. One may consider the Gita to be a textbook of yoga, although it is not considered so, but in fact it is. And the yoga of the Gita is extremely student friendly because, firstly, it is flexible. It gives the student the freedom to start with either action or devotion or knowledge. So the person can choose the path which is most in keeping with the inclinations and the temperament and the circumstances of the student. Secondly, the emphasis is not on the final goal, like samadhi or something like that. The emphasis, while the final goal is revealed, the emphasis is on the journey. So enjoy the journey, forget about the destination. And that makes it easy because the Gita tells us how the journey itself can be enjoyed. So while the final goal has been mentioned, it has not been emphasized. Everybody is welcome, no matter at what stage in life you are, no matter how evolved you are. You can start from where you are, take a few steps in the right direction, and the divine help would be available. Now, and it gives assurance that every bit helps. Even if you take only a few steps instead of going the whole journey, that does help. It helps in making this life easier, and it also gives a head start in the next life so that you can start from where you left off. And therefore, no effort on the path of yoga is a waste. It stays with us and helps us complete the journey of the soul from life to life. Then, it accepts each one of us as we are, looks upon individuals as sort of having personalities which are the result of three modes of nature: tamas, that is inertia and ignorance; rajas, ambitions, desires, passions, and kinetic activity; and sattva, that is knowledge and harmony. Now, each one of us has each of these three in different proportions, and the way we are today is not the way we need to stay all our life. We can always change the proportion of these three: reduce tamas, increase rajas, reduce rajas, and move to sattva. In fact, moving from tamas to rajas and from rajas to sattva is the way to go to fulfill the purpose of life. and also to make our life full of love, peace, joy, and to get a sense of fulfillment from life. So we are, the Gita accepts us as we are. All types of devotees are acceptable, and all types means even those who want some material gains, the Artharthi, even he is acceptable. The one who turns to the Gita in a state of sorrow and misery, the Artha, he is also acceptable, as is the Jigyasu and the Jnani. That is the one who is inquisitive about what the divine is all about. He wants to know what he is, who he is, what the relationship is between him and the rest of the universe, what the purpose of life is. The one who is interested in these deep existential questions is, of course, welcome. And also the Jnani, that is the one who has all this knowledge and wants further experience of this knowledge, and therefore becomes a devotee. Now, all these four types of devotees, including the those who want some material gains and those who want relief from misery, they're all acceptable. So the divine accepts all of us as we are, and that's a great assurance. Then the direction and the destination have been defined. The destination of this journey of the soul has been defined, but then the direction has also been defined. The direction is to change our nature by tilting the balance from tamas to rajas, and from rajas to sattva. And then the Gita does not tell us to renounce worldly life. It is compatible with worldly life. In fact, it tells us, do all your actions in the yogic poise. Yogastha kuru karmani. The Gita is essentially a lesson delivered by the divine to a human disciple. The divine is in human form as Sri Krishna, and the human disciple is Arjuna. The sequence that the Gita follows is from Karma Yoga to Jnana Yoga, and from Jnana Yoga to Bhakti Yoga. Now, why that particular sequence? Arjuna is a man of action, and therefore what he knows most about is action or work or karma. And therefore, it's best to start with that. No, that is the student-friendly approach of the Gita. Start with what the student already knows something about, what the student is most at home about. But then at the same time, the student has to be taken beyond what he already knows, and therefore create in him the curiosity to know more. So you find in the first 1/3 of the Gita, although the emphasis is on action, the curiosity for knowing more is also created. Because Sri Krishna says many things which cannot be understood without further knowledge. Say even one of the most widely quoted verses of the Gita, Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Now it looks very enigmatic. You have an entitlement to action, but not to the fruit of your action. If I'm doing something, why am I not entitled to the fruit of my action? Now it looks, therefore, very enigmatic. And there are many other things about death not being an important event, because it is just like changing clothes, and so on and so forth. So there are many things right in the first 1/3 of the Gita which are rather enigmatic and can be understood much better only with deeper knowledge. So the curiosity has been created. Once the student has become curious, then he is ready to receive the knowledge. And that's what happens in the middle 1/3 of the Gita, which is essentially about knowledge. And then this knowledge is first given in theoretical terms, particularly in chapter 10. And then the disciple is curious to have the experience. He says that, well, I believe in everything that you said, but I want to see it. See, is a figurative term, because, we say that seeing is believing. We consider that to be the most dependable sense. But here, seeing means that I want to experience it. So the experience is important, and that is what Sri Krishna tells him, that you cannot experience, you cannot see the divine with the eyes that you have, and therefore I'll give you divine eyes. Divyat Chakshu Dadami. I'll give you divine eyes, and then only you will be able to see. So now Arjuna gets the experience and is fully convinced about the knowledge. Now that he knows the glory of the Lord, and he knows that this person who is in front of me, whom I have so far been treating as a friend, is actually the divine incarnate. So then why should I think about what to do? Why not just do what he tells me to do? Now, that is the attitude of a devotee. So, his devotion, Arjun's devotion, is a corollary to the knowledge that he gets about the divine. And therefore, we find that in the last one third of the Gita, in fact, the emphasis is on devotion. So, the Gita is moving from action to knowledge and from knowledge to devotion because of the student in front of the teacher. So, he starts with action, which is the most appropriate. Sri Aurobindo says the uh, one of the principles of teaching is from near to the far. So, start from what is near to the student and then take him further. So it takes the student from action, which the Arjun is very familiar with, knows quite a bit about, to knowledge, and from knowledge, the corollary is devotion. But then the sequence doesn't have to be the same for everybody who turns to the divine who is on the path of yoga. Suppose a person is knowledge oriented, then he can get this knowledge from scriptures, but then he may develop this curiosity that, well, this knowledge I believe in, but then I want to experience the way Arjun did after getting the knowledge in chapter 10 of the Gita. So then this person becomes curious to get the experience. He gets the experience, and so he has deeper knowledge. And like Arjun, he also becomes a devotee now that he knows the glory of the Lord. And then he says, what is the use of all this knowledge and devotion if I do nothing for the object of my devotion? And therefore, action also comes in. Now, suppose a person is devotion oriented and he starts with pure and simple devotion. In fact, devotion is simple. I am in your hands. Do with me whatever you want. I am at your disposal. And this pure and simple adoration and devotion and surrender is the way of bhakti or devotion. And in fact, many of our spiritual masters have been devotees. That's how they started. uh, like Sri Ramakrishna, Guru Nanak, Mirabai, Tulsidas, Surdas. Uh, so many of them, they have been devotees. And one starts with devotion, and the devotion is complete and total. Knowledge comes to the direct route. That is, the person actually experiences the divine directly. And once the knowledge is there, the seeker may now choose to express this knowledge in words. And what he writes in words, inspired by the divine, becomes a scripture. So a person who starts with devotion doesn't have to read a scripture, he may end up creating a scripture, as many of these devotees have done. And then this devotee would also say, what is the use of all this devotion and knowledge if I do nothing for the object of my devotion? So action comes in. So no matter what one starts with, whether it's action or knowledge or devotion, if the person walks long enough and sincerely enough on the path, eventually he ends up walking all the three paths, all the three streams of the yoga of the Gita. So the triune, in fact, is one. And the triune meets when action is enlightened by knowledge and lubricated by devotion. The immense peace and joy that one gets through devotion and engaging in the work which is inspired by that devotion has been brought out beautifully by the mother in her prayer dated the 23rd of May 1914. In thy love is peace, in thy love is joy, in thy love is thy servitor's sovereign lever of work. So this devotion works as a lever. It magnifies the force, a lever magnifies the force. With less force, one can lift a much heavier weight. That is what a lever is about. So the devotion, the love for the divine, works as a lever of work, along with giving us immense peace and joy. Why this peace and joy? Because one is devoted to the divine. One tends to become one with that divine. And the divine has no desires, it has no ambitions. The divine has no anger, hatred, or jealousy. And therefore, the divine is always at peace. And the devotee of the divine also experiences that peace and joy. And then he can also use this devotion as a lever for work. His work becomes much more effective. Now, let's see a little more on what the Gita has to say on action, which is what in the modern world people are most interested in knowing more about. And in the essays on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo says that in relation to action, or for that matter, in relation to the entire message of the Gita, and there is a developing argument. First, Sri Krishna tells Arjun, renounce the fruit of your action. This comes in the second chapter. Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. That is, you are entitled to the action, but not the fruit of the action, and therefore do not be attached to the fruit of action. Now, this translates in simpler language into disinterested performance of duty. And it's very often said that, well, that is the principal message of the Gita. But if that is all that the Gita had to say, the remaining 16 chapters were not necessary. The Gita does have a lot more to say, and this is only the beginning. A simple first step in this argument, renounce the fruit of the action, which itself is enigmatic. If I am doing something, why should I renounce the fruit? Why can I not be entitled to the fruit? You know, karmanyeva adhikaraste, adhikara. Adhikara is usually translated as right. But here, properly speaking, it means entitlement. One is entitled to action. That is, one is entitled to do what one wants to do. But then what the outcome of that action will be, the person is not entitled to insist on a particular type of outcome. He may expect a certain outcome, but then he cannot insist on it. And therefore, he'll be at peace only if he is not attached to the fruit of action, if he has inwardly renounced the fruit of action. Now, what is the next step in this developing argument? Renounce the feeling that I am the doer. Now it becomes easier to understand why the fruit of action should be renounced. Because if I am not the doer, then how can I be entitled to the fruit? And this comes with the first time in the third chapter. Ahankara vimudatma kartaha miti manyate. That is the one who has been bewildered by the ego. Ahankara vimud atma. That is, ahankara is the egoistic arrogance. The one who has been bewildered by this, karta aham, karta aham. That is, I am the doer. Manyate, that's what he thinks, that's what he believes in. So, ahankara vimudatma karta aham iti manyate. So, renounce the doership, renounce this feeling that I am the doer. The next step in the argument is renounce I, me, and minus. Sort of goes beyond the scope of just action. In general, renounce this I feeling, me feeling, and minus feeling. I, me, minus, mine, and so on. This comes in the 12th chapter. And in the 12th chapter is a rather short chapter. But then starting with the 13th verse, if we go on for another 15, 20 verses, we find a lot of good advice and given indirectly by Sri Krishna saying, who are the people who are very dear to me? And what he says in this 13th verse is that those who have given up this feeling of I, me, and minus are dear to me. And what is that? Nirmamo nirahankara. Nirmamo, that is not mine. Those who believe in not mine, those who have given up this feeling of mine. And nirahankara, that is those who have given up ahankar, that is the egoistic arrogance. What is the next? Renounce your mind and intellect. This comes in just the next verse, the 14th verse of the same chapter 12. Mayarpita manobuddhi. Mayarpita manobuddhi. That is, Mayarpita, give itself up. What? Manobuddhi. Mana, mind, and buddhi, intellect. So give up both your mind and the intellect. Doesn't mean that you become mindless, because the answer also comes in the Gita. Give up your mind and intellect to whom? The divine, Mayarpita. Renounce it and give it to me. Surrender it to me. What it means is that instead of thinking with your own mind and intellect, think with my mind and intellect, because the divine mind and intellect are perfect. But then how can you think with the divine mind and intellect? By becoming one with the divine. So, Mayarpita Mano Buddhi. Renounce your mind and intellect. And this is expressed more clearly. Be my-minded. Man mana bhava. Be my-minded. Feel like me. Think like me. That's what Sri Krishna tells Arjuna. So, starting with renunciation of only the fruit of action, he's told to renounce everything, because after all, a human being is what his mind is. So, both the feeling and the thinking aspects of the mind, having been given up to the divine, renounced, and the person becoming divine minded, of course, what can be better than that, uh, is the total renunciation that the Gita is asking for. Now, this is not renunciation of worldly life. This is an inner renunciation. None of these is an outer renunciation asking for renouncing worldly action. Now, let's see a little more on what the Gita has to say about action. Be an instrument of the divine. Now, in light of the argument that we have seen so far, the developing argument, this is very easy to accept. We are not the doers, we are mere instruments of the divine. No attachment to the outcome. We cannot be attached to the outcome because we cannot insist upon it. If we cannot insist, then if we are attached, if the outcome turns out to be different from what we had expected, it will only lead to sorrow. It will not change anything. So, no attachment to the outcome and no attachment even to the work, because the work has been given to us by the divine. If that work is taken away for any reasons, there should be no attachment even to the work. And then offer the work to the divine. The one who has given us the work, assigned us the work, the one who has given us the abilities and the circumstances for doing the work, offer the work to him. And what does this offering mean? In practical terms, what it means is put all your heart and soul into the work. Because if one feels that, well, the outcome is not in my hands, and therefore whatever has to happen will happen anyway, and therefore what is the use of working so hard, putting my heart and soul into the work? Now, if one thinks that, that will not be right, because the work has to be made fit to be offered to the divine. And therefore, although we have no entitlement to the outcome of the work, and we don't have to be attached to the outcome, the work should be done with our heart and soul into it, with full dedication, so that it is fit to be offered to the divine. And that is a great joy. Thy servitudes on earth are greater, King, than all the glorious liberties of heaven, says Sri Aurobindo and Savitri. Now let's look at the other aspect of the action. Action done as a matter of duty. I'm supposed to do it. It is my duty to do it. Now, what does the Gita say about how to do one's duty? We have seen that all these things, work as an instrument of the divine, no attachment to the outcome of the work, no attachment to the work itself, and offer the work to the divine. All this is about how to do one's duty. But then the more important thing that the Gita tells us is not how to do the duty, but which duty. Because when it comes to how to do the duty, these are things, most of which can be derived even without going as deep as the Gita has done. Disinterested performance of duty and not insisting on the outcome are things which one can accept even in secular terms without going as deep into the existential truths as the Gita has done. What the Gita has to say and why going so deep is necessary is which duty is important. And to give a few examples, uh, firstly, the Gita itself is in that the context of the Gita is that on one hand, Arjun thought that as a Kshatriya, uh, the class of people who were expected those days to defend good against evil, to defend justice against injustice, it was his duty to fight. So that is one side. On the other side, he thought that as a sensitive human being who wants to live a moral life, it will not be proper to indulge in so much violence, kill so many people, which is inevitable in a war. And particularly when those who die will be my kith and kin. Some of them are not only my elders, they are also my teachers, and so on and so forth. So he had this dilemma between his duty, you can say an official duty as a Kshatriya, and his moral duty as a sensitive person who did not want to indulge in violence. So now this is only one situation. Situations of this type come in our lives as well. Uh, Buddha, his duty to his father was to look after the kingdom. His duty to his wife and child was to take care of them. Now, those were family duties. They came in conflict with the inner call that he felt to work out a solution for the sorrow, misery, and suffering in the world. And for him, that choice seemed more important. That uh, assignment seemed more important. That duty seemed more important than the family duty. And he chose that. Similarly, Swami Vivekananda, after his father passed away, uh, his family duty was to take up a job and take care of the family. But then Sri Ramakrishna helped him see what his mission in life was, and therefore he, instead of taking care of the family duty, he turned to the uh, path that would take him towards enlightenment, which in turn ended up helping the world. Well, leave aside these big examples of the dilemmas that Arjuna had, or Buddha had, or Swami Vivekananda had. Take an example of a lady doctor. Her child is not well, and the child says, please, please don't go to work today. Stay with me. Now she has the dilemma whether to take care of the child or whether to go to the uh, clinic where there are many patients waiting for her. Or a soldier who is told to go and fight a war in a distant land, and for reasons which he feels are not justified. But then, as a soldier in the army of his country, it is his duty as a soldier, it is his duty as a patriot to do as he is told. But then, somewhere within tells him that actually he is not going for a noble cause. Now, these are the different types of dilemmas which we face. Sometimes big choices to be made, sometimes small choices to be made, but these dilemmas are universal in nature, and that's how the Gita becomes relevant to each one of us. Now, what should we do in these situations? When there's a conflict between, say, uh, family duty, patriotic duty, moral duty, social duty, which duty should we select? We can't do all of them. There's a conflict between these different duties. The ultimate final message of the Gita is do the divine duty. This comes towards the end of the Gita. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Sarva dharman parityajya, give up all dharmas, abandon all dharmas. Now looks strange, a religious scripture saying abandon all dharmas, forget about all of them. But the Gita says exactly that. Now what does dharma mean here? A sense of right and wrong, as one has learnt from the Shastras, the scriptures, the various written codes of ethical conduct. Ignore all of them, forget all of them. But then do instead what? To decide what to do. Mamekam charanam vraja. Take refuge in me. means do what I am telling you to do. Now, how does one know what the divine duty is? Arjun had the good fortune of having Sri Krishna in front of him to tell him what he should do. But then how about us, ordinary mortals, who do not have that good fortune, who don't have the privilege of having Sri Krishna in front of us? We have our Krishna within, our soul, which has a dynamic component, which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have called the psychic being. So do what the psychic being tells you. That is what will tell us what the divine duty is. I'll not go into the details of how to identify the voice of the psychic being and so on, but it is that shy and faint and non assertive inner voice which one hears at the right moment when we have such a choice to be made. If one quietens the surface activity of the mind, this voice will speak to us, we'll be able to hear it, and it does not take long to give its verdict. It's a very quick voice and it's a very clear voice, a clear voice that leaves us with no doubts and questions. So when one hears that sort of a voice and knows that, well, I know what the right thing to do is, the only thing is now to pick up the courage to do it, then we know that this is the voice of the soul or its dynamic aspect, the psychic being. So that is how we know what the divine duty is. So when we have a conflict between different types of duties, do what the divine says, and we all have that divine within to tell us in that clear and quick manner through that voice, inner voice, what to do, what the divine wants us to do. And once we know that, then we can follow this advice which has been given to us in the form of a prayer by the mother. Grant that I may do as well as I can the best thing to do. So I should do as well as I can. Here, the mother is not saying, grant that I may do as well as possible. That may not be possible for me, but at least let me do as well as I can. What should I do as well as I can? The best thing to do. And what is the best thing to do? The best thing to do is what the divine wants me to do, what my psychic being is telling me to do. So even when there's a conflict between different duties, the best thing to do is what the divine wants us to do. The most important duty is the divine duty. About the Gita, the mother has said that Sri Aurobindo considers the message of the Gita to be the basis of the great spiritual movement which has led and will lead humanity more and more to its liberation, that is to say, to its escape from falsehood and ignorance towards the truth. So the message of the Gita is not only of universal value, it has a futuristic significance. It has not only served us well so far, it will lead humanity more and more to its liberation from falsehood, ignorance, and towards the truth. If you have any questions beyond what we can take up in this session, please drop an email to us at yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for making this event go well. And thank you for all. Thank you all for being there. Any questions? Aditya, you can coordinate the questions and see if there are any in the chat. So if there are no questions at all, then on next Saturday at the same time, we'll take up the synthesis of yoga, and you'll get a glimpse of the synthesis of yoga, which is another one of the major works of Sri Aurobindo. Aditi, would you like to close the session now? Or you want to say anything? She's on mute.
No, we can just close the session with a moment of silence and just take in what we have shared.